From Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
A glimmer of hope as we head for the cliff. Welcome to the Thursday edition as House Republicans pass their own health care plan. The same day, a petition to extend Obamacare subsidies got enough signatures to hit the floor. We're going to discuss the way forward and what might happen next year in this whole story, with subsidies set to expire in just about 2 weeks, when we talk to Republican Congressman Jodey Arrington, who's chair of the House Budget Committee, and by Democratic Congresswoman Sarah Elfreth of Maryland. They'll both be here coming up this hour. The latest CPI out today shows prices rising at the slowest pace in over 4 years. We'll discuss with Liz Pancotti at the Groundwork Collaborative, looking under the hood at the data with analysis from our political panel. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us for the hour. And we start, as always, with a look at Wall Street. Not bad today. Charlie Pellet has the Thursday trade live from New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe Mathieu. Indeed, still in the green. You alluded to the CPI report. We did get data showing U.S. inflation cooled last month. That did ignite stock and bond markets. And right now, the S&P off session lows, off session highs, but it's up 70, 67.92, a gain there of 1%. Dow Industrials up 183, up by about 0.4%. The Nasdaq Composite Index surging 394 points, up 1.7%. The 10-year yield, 4.12%, with a 2-year at 3.47%. Gold is down 0.1%, 43.32 the ounce on the precious metal. West Texas Intermediate crude, 56.41 a barrel, up 0.8%. And Bitcoin is up 0.5%. Bitcoin, 86,340 right now on Bitcoin. Helping spur the rally today, Micron Technology shares are up 12.5%. The largest American maker of computer memory chips rose by the most in 8 months after the company gave an upbeat forecast for the current quarter. Now, this warm reaction sets the company apart from both Broadcom and Oracle, which jarred shareholders last week after their results. Oracle up today by 0.7%, and Broadcom up by just about 1%. Warner Brothers shares falling below Netflix's $27.75 offer price. Traders are betting that what once looked like a potential bidding war for Warner Brothers Discovery is turning into a one-horse race, with Netflix winning out over Paramount Skydance. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up now by 1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues right now. And back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, Joe Mathieu.
All right, Charlie, many thanks to Charlie Pellet. He'll be watching Wall Street for us throughout the hour here with another update on the markets in about 20 minutes' time as we talk politics here in Washington on the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio, streaming live on YouTube and on your satellite radio at channel 121, with big questions about health care and what will happen at the end of this month with enhanced COVID-era Obamacare subsidies that you hear us talk about every day set to expire. We do have a bit of a status update. A lot happened yesterday, and you heard much of it take place here in real time on Bloomberg. We spoke with Mike Lawler just a short time after he and 3 other moderate Republicans crossed the aisle to sign a discharge petition that would force a vote on a 3-year extension, a clean extension. This is the Hakeem Jeffries discharge petition, and so that was a pretty big deal that they walked across the aisle on this. But there is more. You know, the House Republican leadership also had its own bill. It emerged Friday night. We've talked about this as well. It does not extend Obamacare subsidies, but it did pass on a party line vote, 216-211, while you were out at the holiday party last night. So what's going on here? Is it possible to avoid the cliff? Senate's getting ready to go. Even if these things pass now, you can't do anything about it till January, right? That's when the discharge petition would see action on the floor. Either way, Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader in the House, thinks everybody ought to stay until it's done. Here's what he said.
Under no circumstances should the House of Representatives adjourn until we successfully extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits for tens of millions of Americans. American people deserve a vote today, not tomorrow, not next week, not next year, today.
Of course, that would require a Christmas miracle. And that discharge petition I mentioned, that's 7 legislative days before it hits the floor. That brings us likely well into January. So let's figure out the path forward here and exactly how we're going to fund the government past the end of the month in January. Will there in fact be regular order? Jodey Arrington is with us right now, live from Capitol Hill, the Republican congressman who chairs the House Budget Committee, the voice of Texas, with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Mr. Chairman, welcome back. It's great to have you on Bloomberg, and I'm wondering what you see here with it, what seems like a dozen different bills to attack health care reform or extend subsidies to some extent. Is there any chance of a deal coming together between now and the end of the month?
Not one that's going to become law, Joe. Let me start by saying Democrats created this additional layer of COVID or Obamacare subsidy during COVID, and then they extended it for another 2 years. So they had total control of Congress. They had the White House. They didn't extend it then. They didn't make it permanent. They did make the green energy tax subsidies for corporations permanent, so they had a choice. So these are expiring as designed, just like every other COVID program has wound down as COVID is behind us. So the other piece that is important is the COVID subsidies and the underlying program, Obamacare, has increased deductibles and premiums every year. So the question should be, how do we make health care affordable? And at least the bill that was passed, I don't think it will become law, but the Republicans passed out of the House last night, will reduce premiums, according to CBO, by 11%, save $30 billion. Those are the things we need to be working together on, not throwing good money after bad and propping up a failed system.
Well, you know, Congressman, we've even had some Democrats on the air here who say you're right. This is a program that needs reform, but we also need a bridge, whether it's a year or two, whatever the extension needs to be, so people don't get bit when they wake up the first morning in January with what I realize are already higher premiums. But you've got open enrollment that goes to the 15th. Is there a world in which that could be extended and a shock absorber essentially could be put on?
You know, I don't believe so, Joe. And I got to tell you, my position is we already have tax subsidies built into Obamacare that effectively subsidize people at the bronze level at 90% of their premiums. So that's the subsidy that taxpayers front at about 60 to 70 billion a year. Now that cost has doubled when you add these COVID era subsidies. So you would have to do a lot. The Democrats haven't included any of these things, but you'd have to put an income cap so you're not subsidizing wealthy people. You've seen the CBO reports and the GAO reports about the tens of billions of fraud, the millions of ineligible people. So I understand some of my colleagues wanting a bridge, but the point is we're well beyond COVID. They designed these things to wind down and go away. We should focus on the things like we did in the last night's bill, close the loophole that allows insurance companies to actually direct people to higher cost coverage plans that they don't want or need, and that will start reducing the premiums and the cost of care. And there are plenty of other ways to do it, many of which, Joe, are bipartisan. So I think we throw plenty of subsidy. Unfortunately, we're throwing the subsidy at the wrong place. It's to the insurance company and not to the individual and family. So we should work together to make ACA actually affordable, the private market affordable, and bring costs down altogether.
You saw the Republican bill in the Senate, inspired by Senator Bill Cassidy, that features health savings accounts. Mr. Chairman, is that an idea that we should be considering in the House?
Absolutely. We expanded health savings accounts in the big, beautiful bill that passed. We should do more, again, to provide federal assistance to people, let them keep more of their money to provide health care for their families and not line the pockets of insurance companies. They're the only ones that have actually done well since the advent of Obamacare. So there's that. There's the health reimbursement accounts. It's similar, where small businesses can provide these health savings accounts for their employees. There are things that we're doing now that are just plain ridiculous. We're paying hospitals more for the same outpatient procedures that we pay physician groups to do. And if we equalize those payments, by the way, the outcomes are the same. If we equalize those payments, we'd save $150 billion, and we'd stop this consolidation of physicians in one big hospital, big insurance, big pharma. These monopoly forces are making the markets not competitive, and they are not giving the choices to the consumer and patients. Yeah. And that, at the crux of it, that's what's the problem is. Too many mandates, too many loopholes, too many regulations, too many taxes. We got to clean it up and let competitive markets do what they do best, and that's providing the best quality at the best cost for a product for consumers.
You're the chairman of the Budget Committee, of course. Congressman, what are we in for here when you come back in January? Because there seems to be a little bit louder talk, and I realize Chuck Schumer was very clear he doesn't want a government shutdown, but there's talk about sleepwalking into a shutdown again with a lack of trust between Democrats and Republicans. Maybe we want to park that over here from now, because I know that you're hoping to see regular order come back into fashion on Capitol Hill. Do you have enough time to write a budget and pass it?
We do, and what I would hope is that we could actually use budget reconciliation again, because unfortunately, Joe, I don't think that Democrats and Republicans are going to be able to work together. I think many of the Democrats, not all, but the leadership wants health care to be a wedge issue for November. There are others who want to actually address it. We have different ideas on that. But Republicans have the tool that actually Democrats use to create these COVID-era subsidies called budget reconciliation. It gives us the simple majority in the Senate, so we don't need Democrat support. We did that with the big, beautiful bill. Let's do it to make health care affordable. Not just lower taxes, not just better energy policies, not just cutting spending so we can actually reduce the pressure on the higher prices and inflation. Let's make health care affordable. That will bring costs down, make life more affordable, cost of living will go down, things will get better, but health care's got to be addressed, and I think the only way to do it, Joe, unfortunately, because I think it's better when we can work together, but we shouldn't apologize for using reconciliation and having taking a unilateral approach as Republicans if we believe in our policies, and I certainly do.
Well, it gives us a bit of a sense of where we're heading in the new year. Mr. Chairman, it's great to have you back. Thanks for being with us. He's chairman of the Budget Committee in the House, Jodey Arrington of Texas. On this CPI day, I know you're having trouble following the data. Everyone is right now, because it's dropping at various times still because of the government shutdown, the longest in history. And we don't even have a complete view. Not all the data were collected here, but we've got a number for November on inflation in this country. Dare I say affordability? The president talked about it a lot last night, and what we have here is the headline he was hoping to read. Core CPI easing to a 4-year low in shutdown-impacted report. First person we wanted to call today was Liz Pancotti, the managing director of policy and advocacy at the Groundwork Collaborative. She's been digging through the numbers since 8:30 this morning, with us now live on Bloomberg TV and radio. Liz, it's great to see you. Do the numbers, when you look under the hood, fulfill the headline?
You know, it's tough to see what we're looking at under the hood today, given the missing data that we've got from BLS, given the effects of the government shutdown. It feels a little like we are flying blind. You know, the headline number ticked down a little bit. I assume the president had seen that by the time he gave his primetime speech last night. But when we look under the hood, there is a little bit of funny business going on. For one, the BLS imputed zeros for shelter inflation in October, giving missing data. Unfortunately, as a result of that and some other collection issues, we probably won't have a really solid, accurate accounting of inflation until probably the April print as things iron out. And so I think as the Fed looks at this ahead of their January meeting, I think we're probably set to really look at that January print for December data and potentially even into February with that January data to see things iron out.
What worries you in here? I know the core number impressed a lot of people. Markets are feeling pretty good about it. We're talking about a rate cut in January, but you're still looking at beef prices up 21% in November, coffee up 19%, banana prices up 7%. Real people buy this stuff, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think especially as we head into the holidays here, we are really seeing grocery prices affect people. Utility bills are up. Energy is up 6.9%. I think those pressure points in the winter are always a little bit tougher given, you know, large holiday gatherings and high heating bills, especially in the colder regions, the Northeast and the Midwest. Those are really going to take effect on people. At Groundwork, we had analysis out just 2 weeks ago that showed that popular holiday gifts are up 26% this year, given so many of those are imported from China, and tariff rates are just really high. So while the headline number, might seem a little bit optimistic, as we look at what expectations are, the New York Fed's November survey, Conference Board data, University of Michigan, all of those are showing that American families don't feel like relief is coming.
So does the market have this right about January, or does the Fed need to see more?
I think the Fed will want to see more. I think given the missing data, we'll see where PCE comes in and what was imputed for that. But just given the lack of data we have for October, November, I think the Fed is going to want to see things iron out a little bit more. Also with the labor market ticking, the unemployment rate ticking up earlier this week, I think that the combination of those things will probably see the Fed hold off in January to get a little bit more information under our belts. Additionally, I think as part of the price collection for November, a lot of that data was collected during Black Friday sales and other promotions. And so just waiting to see what price decreases or lower price increases stick. I think the Fed will want a little bit more information before making a policy move.
You stay up late to watch the president last night, Liz?
I did, though it wasn't a very long speech. As you said, we're running on a speedboat, I think, a couple minutes ago.
That it was a speech on a speedboat, but he talked a lot about what you and I are talking about. And in fact, ran through prices. He had Thanksgiving turkey down 33%, eggs down 82%. He said everything else is falling rapidly. Here's a sense of the president in his primetime address.
We're bringing our economy back from the brink of ruin. Wages are rising much faster than inflation. There are more people working today than at any time in American history. 1,450,000 military service members will receive a special, we call warrior dividend before Christmas. I'm also taking on the gigantic health insurance companies. I will announce some of the most aggressive housing reform plans in American history.
Okay, a lot of that. We're bringing the economy back from the brink of ruin. He said there, Liz, wages rising faster than inflation, more people working today than at any time in American history. Is all of that supported by data?
What we saw in the jobs report this week, we saw the unemployment tick up a little bit. We have seen retailers say that they are hiring a lot fewer seasonal employees this year. Real wages are not looking so hot. I don't see a lot of truth in the president's statement. It was kind of funny. I think Mike Conzel pulled the spreadsheet of CPI data and just sorted by descending to see what price points he pulled out. I was confused by airfares and sports tickets, but I thought those were funny ones to pull out. And apparently, if you just sort by the biggest numbers, that's where you got them. I think for most families, they're not even thinking about the price of airfares or sports tickets right now because they're struggling to pay the grocery bill and the electric bill.
Oh, you're making me want to fly somewhere. Just 30 seconds here left. Liz, are you still waiting for the real impact of tariffs because of front running? When does it show up?
Yeah, I think we're seeing this in Christmas presents right now under the tree. Harvard Pricing Lab shows that goods prices are up about 7% from their pre-Liberation Day trend. And I think Goldman still has the estimate at about 55% of tariffs being passed through. I think we are at the tail end of those inventories that were kind of inflated, rushing ahead of that Liberation Day. The president has still not figured out exactly what's going on with China. So TBD there.
Yeah. TBD. Could be an interesting new year for a lot of reasons. Following our conversations with Liz Pancotti. Thank you, Liz. And Jodey Arrington. Better fasten the chin strap. Our conversation coming up with Congresswoman Sarah Elfreth, the Democrat from Maryland, on Bloomberg. It appears the paranoia was well placed. The paranoia we discussed among marijuana investors just a couple of days ago with Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence. There was fear that Lucy might be about to pull the football again. Yeah, big house party set to start in about 7 minutes at the White House with the president putting pen to paper or Sharpie to something to sign a rescheduling of cannabis that would unlock a more favorable tax treatment status, they say, for cannabis companies around the country. But pot stocks have turned decidedly lower today, with great disappointment about what this order apparently will include. A briefing with reporters earlier reportedly includes that the president will direct the attorney general to expedite and complete the marijuana rescheduling process and allow doctors to prescribe CBD products that would be eligible for Medicare coverage and more. CBD products are different than THC products, so don't smoke them if you got them, because that might not be covered. We're going to find out shortly when the president emerges. We haven't seen this on a piece of paper yet. Now, I've got more for you. The press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, just a short time ago announcing on social media that there's a new name for the Kennedy Center. Taking to X to write, I have just been informed that the highly respected board of the Kennedy Center, some of the most successful people from all parts of the world, have just voted unanimously to rename the Kennedy Center to the Trump Kennedy Center. Congratulating in this note, not only President Trump, but likewise, she says, congratulations, President Kennedy, because this will be a truly great team long into the future. We need to get to Tyler. She's on the north lawn of the White House right now, Washington correspondent. Tyler, everyone saw this coming, right? The president made himself the chairman of the board.
Right. This was, I guess, long expected, considering it's really the latest effort under this Trump administration to remake the institution here in the nation's capital. Of course, you'll recall back in February, we saw that major shakeup of the board. Many members that had been appointed under the last administration were fired. And as you mentioned, we saw President Trump himself appointed as the new chair. Now, there is reporting that this vote happened with President Trump phoning into the meeting. That's according to some media reports that have already started circulating after this tweet was posted by the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt. Worth also mentioning the last part of that post on X. She says that the building will no doubt attain new levels of success and grandeur, in her words. Important context here, you'll recall when the One Big Beautiful bill passed this summer, tucked inside of it was $257 million appropriated specifically for a renovation of the Kennedy building. So Joe, this really, as we're discussing, is the latest in what has been a series of steps this year, both with the institution itself, but of course the backdrop that this is in the nation's capital. And President Trump has tried to assert his authority here in the nation's capital, including when it comes to the National Guard and crime and working with the local government.
We've, of course, seen ticket sales impacted by the politics around the Kennedy Center, and even some touring shows cancel appearances. Tyler, I thought only Congress could rename the Kennedy Center. Is that the case?
I'm going to have to get back to you on the exact specifics of that. According to the White House press secretary, this was a vote by the board, which, as we've been discussing, was experienced a shakeup earlier this year under the Trump administration. So I'll get back to you on the exact specifics on how this happened, but as you alluded to, widely expected.
I appreciate this, Tyler, and we'll keep our eyes on this EO signing that's set to begin a couple of minutes from now, and it looks like they'll be running late at the White House. Tyler Kendall on the North Lawn today with news on the Trump Kennedy Center. We'll see if that's codified. Sarah Elfreth was listening to our conversation. The Democratic Congresswoman from Maryland joins us now on Bloomberg TV and radio, live from Capitol Hill. Congresswoman, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg. I didn't think I'd be asking you about this, but does Congress need to have a say in renaming the Kennedy Center? And as a Democrat, would you buy tickets at the Trump Kennedy Center?
Thanks, Joe, for having me on. And I was giggling over here while I listened in on that conversation. Just like the president trying to rename the Department of Defense, the Department of War, this is a similar situation. It requires an act of Congress. And so this is pretty make-believe at the moment. And unfortunately, taxpayer dollars might be used to change the name on the wall. But the truth of the matter is we have a system of checks and balances and shared governing here in Washington, and Congress is going to have to approve that. I would be a no vote. As you mentioned, ticket sales are down. There's kind of ramifications of the president's getting so involved in the Kennedy Center politics. I don't quite understand it when we have so many other issues, serious issues the American people are counting on us to address. Why he's spending so much time on this, it boggles the mind.
Yeah. Well, it's just something we thought we'd get your take on, Congresswoman. And we're a little more interested in your take on health care right now, because we had a remarkable conversation yesterday with Mike Lawler, the Republican from New York, who signed on to Hakeem Jeffries' discharge petition to extend Obamacare subsidies. He was one of 4 Democrats to do so. Now, I realize Republicans passed their bill last evening that doesn't touch Obamacare subsidies. Right. And I'm wondering what you think about the next step here. I just asked Congressman Jodey Arrington this same question. Is there a deal to be had here, or we're as good as over the cliff?
Listen, I'm an optimist. I wouldn't be in this business if I weren't. I would like to believe that cooler heads can prevail, particularly as upwards of 20 million Americans are set to experience this huge affordability crisis on January 1st because Congress has chosen not to act. House Speaker Johnson has willfully chosen not to negotiate with Democrats to get the votes he would need to pass something actually meaningful and lower the cost of health care insurance for tens of millions of Americans. You know, maybe we'll get a Christmas miracle. Cooler heads can prevail and we can come together. I'm grateful for Mike and the 3 other Republicans for signing on. I think they saw the light. They heard from their constituents. They're doing something about it. That's what everybody watching at home should expect of their members of Congress. But, you know, do I think the Speaker's going to call that up for a vote before we adjourn in, I don't know, maybe an hour? Not likely.
Maybe an hour. Well, yeah, because I guess by the rules, with it being discharge, that would likely put you into the beginning or middle of January when you get back, right? Is this the issue that defines the midterms? Is this what brings Democrats back into power?
I think this is one part of the issue that brings, you know, hopefully the confidence of the American people back to the Democratic Party. It's the affordability crisis broadly. You were just chatting about the impacts as we're going into the holiday season. I spent, you know, my Small Business Saturday a few weeks ago visiting small shops in Annapolis and in Ellicott City in my district and just talking to those business owners about the tariff hits that they took, purchasing a lot of the products they had on shelves for the holiday season pre-tariffs, and then to come to find out that they're going to have to pay, depending on the country, 30% tariffs. They can't afford to eat those costs. They're being passed on to the American people. And that's just one part. We talked about groceries before. We talked about, you know, I just paid my electricity bill and it was staggering. We talk about health insurance, housing, childcare. I hear constantly, you know, the Republicans promised to solve it. The president promised to solve it on day 1 of his presidency. We're almost a year into that with no meaningful impact. At least folks back at home in my district aren't feeling the impact of his actions. And so I think this is a mantle that Democrats are really charged up to lead on over the next year and prove not just that we're against the president or against Republicans, but we're actually for solving this affordability crisis.
Congresswoman, you represent Maryland's 3rd district, which includes all of Annapolis, and of course that means our great Naval Academy. You're also a member of the Armed Services Committee, so I'm sure you're knee-deep in conversations and briefings around what the president's referring to as a naval blockade around Venezuela. There was a closed-door briefing earlier this week, and I'm wondering what questions you have going forward and whether you think this is the march to war in the Caribbean.
It's really unclear. I was in 2 closed-door classified briefings this week, and I left with more questions than answers that I have received from both Secretary Hegseth, Secretary Rubio, and the Navy. 14% of our fleet is now engaged in some type of conflict, undefined conflict. I was with the Secretary Hegseth when he talked just 2 weeks ago about not entering the American people and our service members into meaningless and endless wars, and yet our goals with Venezuela are completely undefined. And as a member of Congress, member of the Armed Services Committee, that really troubles me. It's keeping me up at night with so many of my constituents, including a lot of folks from the Naval Academy down there right now. At the same time, the American people deserve to have answers. This is, you know, months-long engagement in a part of the world that the president can't define our goals or why we have 14% of our fleet down there in the first place. And as I've said, I can't tell you how many times in my first 11 months in the House, our founders and framers structured the Constitution intentionally putting war powers in Article 1 with the Congress. Unfortunately, we had 2 resolutions yesterday that did not pass to kind of regain some of that control. I hope the American people are equally concerned.
14% is a remarkable number, Congresswoman. I've only got a minute left. The president said yesterday, having framed this about drugs until now, that this is about the oil, he said. Venezuela took our oil illegally and we're going to take it back. Is that what this is about, oil?
I don't know what it's about. I also think that it's a false bill of goods that he's selling to the American people. Listen, I've had family members who have unfortunately lost their lives to fentanyl. But if we were focused on fentanyl, we'd be focused on China and not on Venezuela. What they're taking, what they're sinking, are boats carrying cocaine, not boats carrying fentanyl. And at the same time, the president is pardoning literal drug kingpins who have been convicted by juries of actually killing people through the drug trade. So there's a mismatch of messaging here that is also deeply concerning.
Democratic Congresswoman Sarah Elfreth of Maryland. It's great to have you, Congresswoman. Thanks for being part of our conversation. We'll assemble our political panel next, only here on Bloomberg. We are watching Wall Street with Charlie and with the help of Norah, Mulinda, and the help of Micron Technology. A big story today with another batch of earnings after the bell. We're going to turn to FedEx and Nike, but right now it is MU on the rise, up 14% here, or $30 a share. Boy, things change quickly. The whole story, the narrative going into the earnings session last evening after hours, was that the whole AI bubble was popping and everyone was losing faith in the AI spend. Dare we bring up OpenAI? But a day like this, rising tide, lifting all boats, we see a lot of green. And we wanted to talk to Norah, Mulinda about that. Bloomberg markets correspondent with us now on Bloomberg TV and radio. Norah, how should we be reading the gains here? Is this as much a relief rally, a bargain hunting move, or do we have a whole new dose of FOMO thanks to Micron Technology?
Well, Micron is certainly pulling a lot of its peers higher. We are seeing it as one of the biggest gainers in that group here. I mean, as you look at Micron, of course, we did get the rosy outlook, and that is really just bolstering expectations for the future. They're actually talking about the fact that they are seeing the company being able to charge more for their products. They're pointing towards supply shortages, limited inventory, and surging demand as some of the things buoying this stock higher. And you really are seeing the street celebrating, as you mentioned just a tad earlier. I'm looking at shares of Micron up about 14%. You're seeing double-digit gains on the screen right now. And if you look at the stock year to date, it's really been on a tear. Shares up more than 200% so far this year. So great time to be an investor in Micron here.
All right, Norah, thank you so much. Norah, Mulinda, live from New York. Something important is happening at the White House. They're bringing the pool into the Oval right now. So I'm just going to apologize to Rick and Jeanne in advance. You guys will get off the hook early, it looks like. The president reportedly set to put his name on an executive order to reschedule cannabis. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital, and Jeanne Zaino, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, are with us right now. We'll note that pot stocks are heading lower, so it's not entirely clear what the language is going to read. Jeanne, is the president taking an issue away from Democrats?
That is a fear amongst many of the liberal groups. They're saying, there's quotes like, he's taking marijuana right away from us. And, it does for those 18 to 34-year-olds, almost 3/4 of them who supported Trump in 2024 support the legalization. But this is obviously not legalization. It's a rescheduling, should say that. But that is where they're headed. So, it is a concern amongst liberal groups. Donald Trump also had a number of cannabis groups donating to him for his inauguration, his campaign. And Tony Fabrizio, one of his chief strategists, has long worked for cannabis companies. So, there's some push there, and he thinks it's good politics.
All right, Rick, I think you're saved by the bell. The president is talking now with the pool standing right in front of the Resolute desk. Let's bring you in the Oval live on Bloomberg TV and radio.
American patients suffering from extreme pain, incurable diseases, aggressive cancers, seizure disorders, neurological problems, and more, including numerous veterans with service-related injuries and older Americans who live with chronic medical problems that severely degrade their quality of life. And it's so really, I can't tell you, I think I probably have received more phone calls on this, on doing what we're doing. I don't think I received any calls on the other side of it, but hopefully this reclassification, which, by the way, polls at 82%, will help many of those patients live a far better life. We're joined today by Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's doing a fantastic job, Administrator of Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Dr. Mehmet Oz, the FDA Commissioner, Dr. Marty McCary, Director of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, and the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, Dr. Norah Valkow, as well as Dr. Ilana Braun from the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Duke University's Dr. David Casseret, the National Commander of the American Legion, Dan Wiley, and my friend Howard Kessler. Howard, how are you feeling? I'm telling you, he looks better than he did 20 years ago. But I don't want to go through what you went through to get there. Right? But it looks like you're doing great. I'm proud of you. I want to emphasize that the order I am about to sign is not the legalization, or it doesn't legalize marijuana in any way, shape, or form, and in no way sanctions its use as a recreational drug. It has nothing to do with that. Just as the prescription painkillers may have legitimate uses, but can also do irreversible damage and never, if you look at some of the damage that can be caused, wreck lives, and if it's abused, it's never safe to use powerful controlled substances in recreational manners, and especially in this case, if you take a look, illegal and unregulated drugs, very, very bad thing. So I've always told my children, don't take drugs, no drinking, no smoking, and just stay away from drugs. I have been, they would look at me and they said, Dad, would you stop saying that? I would say every time I looked at it practically. Young Americans are especially at risk, so unless a drug is recommended by a doctor for medical reasons, just don't do it. At the same time, the facts compel the federal government to recognize that marijuana can be legitimate in terms of medical applications when carefully administered. In some cases, this may include the use as a substitute for addictive and potentially lethal opioid painkillers, and they cause tremendous problems. This can do it in a much lesser way, can make people feel much better that are living through tremendous pain and problems. 40 states and multiple U.S. territories have already recognized the use of medical marijuana. This reclassification order will make it far easier to conduct marijuana-related medical research, allowing us to study benefits, potential dangers, and future treatments. It's going to have a tremendously positive impact, I believe. We're also asking Congress to reconsider its classification of hemp-derived CBD to ensure seniors can access CBD products they have found beneficial for pain and other reasons. Some people are literally dying, and they're dying with tremendous pain, and this can, in many cases, literally stop it. And they have their senses about them, as opposed to painkillers, which don't allow that, don't allow them to die with dignity, frankly. I promise to be the president of common sense, and that is exactly what we're doing. This is really something having to do with common sense, and it's something having to do with the fact that so many people that I respect ask me to do. People that are having problems, big problems. They are having big problems with illness, with cancer in particular. I now want to ask Dr. Oz to say a few words, followed by Dr. Braun, Dr. Casseret, Dan Wiley, and Dr. Valkow. And we'll sign the order as soon as they're complete, and we'll take some questions. Please, go ahead.
Mr. President, thank you for always bravely pushing for common sense change, as you call it.
All right,
so
President Trump speaking live from the Oval Office alongside Dr. Oz and a couple of other doctors behind him, as well as some military veterans, as the President of the United States makes it official. Rescheduling cannabis, what he says does not equate to legalization, remembering that this order will not legalize marijuana in any way. But as he says, marijuana can be legit in terms of medical applications, and this will open up some opportunities for research. It will also allow cannabis companies, as we understand it from analysis at Bloomberg Intelligence, to have a much more favorable tax treatment by the federal government. Let's get back to our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis with us. What's your thought on this, Rick, the way the president just framed that? He's careful to say that we're not legalizing marijuana, but many would suggest that this reclassification is undoing generations of Republican orthodoxy. What do you think?
Yeah, really, Joe, what I picked off in his comments were that he didn't hear from anybody that said this wasn't a good idea. And I would remind him 22 House and Senate Republicans signed an open letter to him asking him not to do this. And then more recently, another 9 sent letters, Republican members of Congress, to the Department of Justice asking them not to do this. So there is a group within the Republican caucus willing to stick their heads up over the fence and say, hey, we don't think it's such a great idea. And I would remind him there's a reason that almost all the states that have had zero tolerance laws toward marijuana are governed by Republican state legislators and Republican governors. And so, yeah, there's a divide politically on this issue. And I think this is another example where, you know, maybe Donald Trump is doing something commonsensical, but it certainly does create a lot of pressure within the coalition that made him president.
We're watching cannabis stocks, which have been on fire recently, Jeanne, and they're all tipping lower today. The MJ ETF is down 6%. MSOS, which we follow more carefully because it's all U.S. cannabis companies, not mixed in with Canada, it's down 13% right now. I don't know if we end up calling this a sell the news situation, but did progressives, did cannabis activists want more?
They probably did. And I think you hear the president there in the remarks, at least I read them, as him trying to be cautious. You know, the medical community has long said that the 1970s Schedule I designation for marijuana didn't make much sense anymore because it includes the idea that there is absolutely no medical use for marijuana. And most members of the medical community say that's not true. So I think that President is on the right side when he says there is medical research use. It needs to be rescheduled. But of course, for people in the cannabis community, they have long wanted more. And I think what Rick's talking about is a really important aspect of this. The president is sort of caught between these two divides in his own party. And I think he's trying to walk a middle that may not make anyone happy. But it is the next logical step. And I think betting markets had this happening at about 90%. So, you know, I think it was expected, but probably not what everybody in the community may have wanted.
Well, he did suggest that it was coming on the campaign trail. Rick, we saw an op-ed recently from Roger Stone urging the president to take this move. So clearly he's got a lot of people around him, to your point, who are suggesting this is a good idea. But you mentioned the senators, and I'll point to those in the DEA who think that they've been abandoned here, having seen in many cases some of their colleagues killed in trying to enforce anti-cannabis law. What kind of a dynamic is the president creating within the administration on this?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of stress. It's not the first policy that he's, you know, taken a position on where he doesn't create that kind of stress. I mean, he is not a, you know, doctrinaire ideologue. He very much talks about his ideology as common sense. And in his world and the advisors around him, like you mentioned, Roger Stone, you know, they're saying, hey, this is common sense. Of course, you're going to do this. And so, yeah, I think he buys off on that. And yet that does create a lot of stress within the government agencies that have long since seen the negative effects of this in communities. And then, of course, as we've talked, the political organizations that have campaigned against this and continue to do so to this day in states that are still having referendums on this topic. So, look, it is, you know, it's a step toward legalization, but not in total.
Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, many thanks to our great panel for the insights. It is official. The president rescheduling cannabis with a cadre of supporters in the Oval Office. Bloomberg Business Week Daily will have more on this as he is expected to take questions from reporters. So keep it right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.